Hey guys, what's going on? Jacob here. So last time we went over the basics of PHP and created our first PHP file which printed out some text onto the page. Today we're going to go deeper into our learning of PHP with conditionals and loops and functions. Some of the stuff we're going to go over today is a bit tricky, but if you stick with it, it'll all come together nicely for you. So let's get started. In programming languages, loops run over the same section of code over and over for a certain period of time, usually with a variation each time. This is very helpful when parsing through data like player stats or financial data. There are three types of loops that we have at our disposal: while, for, and for each loops. And they all have a specific purpose. So let's learn more about them. While loops run for as ever long as the conditional is true. So if our conditional is x is less than 5, then we initialize x to equal 0 outside the loop. Then when we increment x each time the loop is run, the loop will run 5 times. This seems pretty simple, but there's a pretty big hang-up if you're not careful. You have to make sure that the conditional will be false at some point. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with an endless loop and it's going to crash your program. There's also a variation of the while loop, which is the do while loop. But this loop, the while and conditional, is moved to the bottom of the loop, and do takes its place at the top. This makes sure that the loop is run once before the conditional is checked. The next type of loop is the for loop. This is similar to the while loop, but there are a few changes we need to make inside the parentheses. The parentheses take 3 parameters. The first is where we initialize the variable that we'll use in the conditional. The second is where we have the conditional statement, and the last parameter is where we change the variable up or down. So if we were to take the while loop from before and change it into a for loop, first we would make x equals 0, then put x is less than 5, and then increment x by 1. The last type of loop is the for each loop. While it shares a similar name as the for loop, it's not quite the same. The for each loop is used with arrays, and the parentheses follow the array as value pattern. So each time you loop through the array, the value variable is the next item in the array. So let's say we have this array of MLS team names. We can print each of the team names on the page using the for each loop like this. You can also use this with associative arrays. You just change the value part of the parentheses to key arrow values, and then use those variables in your code. Sometimes we want code to run only if the situation is just right. For this we use if else, and else if statements. The basic structure for an if statement looks like this. Next to if, you have the conditional that will be checked. If it's true, then any code inside the next set of curly brackets will be run. But if you want some code to run if the statement is false, then you can use else after the if like this. Any code inside these curly brackets will be run if the conditional is false. Finally, else if fits right in between the if and else statements. This will run if any of the if statements or previous else if statements are false and acts similar to the if statement. If the conditional is true, then that code will run. This is great when there are many possible options in your program. Finally, let's talk about functions. If you have some code that you're going to run over and over again, maybe with some slight variation, you don't want to rewrite that code over and over again. And that's where functions come in. Functions are blocks of code that can be used repeatedly, and they aren't run until they are called in the code. The basic function definition looks like this. Function at the start lets the code know that we are defining a function. Then we have the function name, which is not case sensitive. Parentheses is where any arguments or parameters will go. We'll get into this in a bit. And finally, the code for the function goes inside the curly brackets. From here, there are 2 ways you can get the data out of the function. Option 1 is to echo the data, which we know prints the data onto the page. Or we can return the data, which we can use in a variable in our main code or with another function. Now let's go back to parameters. You can set variables for the function to use inside the parentheses of the function definition, and you can set as many as you want. So let's say we have a multiply function. We can create 2 parameters, num1 and num2. Then we can use these 2 variables inside our function to multiply the 2 numbers together and return the result. You can also set default values for the parameters as well by placing an equal sign and then a value next to the parameter inside the parentheses. Then we don't necessarily have to set a value for the parameter when we call the function. So calling our multiply function with no parameters multiplies 1 and 1. Or if we call it with 1 parameter, 4, it multiplies 1 and 4. Pretty cool, eh? Well, that's all for today. Next time we'll talk more about arrays and go over how to parse through form data with PHP. In the meantime, do you have any questions about what we went over today? If so, leave them down in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. But until next time, good luck and happy coding.